Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in Senior A English. We now turn to two poems that we will be studying together. Mary Borden's The Song of the Mud and Wilfred Owen's Dulce et Decorum Est. Two of the great poems about the horrors of the war. Now, we, of course, looking at Beowulf and looking at other titles that we've been looking at already, the Lovelace poem to the wars, and then Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. There could be the argument made that many of these titles are celebrating war, celebrating the struggle of war, and of course the sacrifice of war. We're now going to compare two titles that will give us, some will argue, a more realistic view of the experience of war. We'll begin with Mary Borden's The Song of the Mud. Let's learn a little bit about her on page 85. Her dates, 1886 to 1968. Born in Chicago to a wealthy family. When World War I broke out, she worked as a nurse in a field hospital that she had equipped with her own money. During this time, she wrote The Song of the Mud, the poem we'll be studying. She continued to write after the war, published The Forbidden Zone, a book of short stories, in 1929. During World War II, she helped set up an ambulance unit that supported the exiled French government's forces in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. The background for The Song of the Mud is all about World War I, and especially the trenches there. The trenches of World War I were constantly being eroded by weather. Rains turned battlefields to mud, and trenches were filled with water. Rats abounded, and they ate the men's food and chewed on the corpses. Trench foot, a fungal disease, was common because of the muddy environment. In extreme cases, the soldier's foot would have to be amputated. Lice caused trench fever, another illness that thrived in the unhealthy mud at the front. You can see by the picture on page 86 how horrific it must have been. Let's now turn to the poem itself. We'll annotate as we go. This is the song of the mud. The pale, yellow, glistening mud that covers the hills like satin. The gray, gleaming, silvery mud that's spread like enamel over the valleys. The frothing, squirting, spurting, liquid mud that gurgles along the roadbeds. The thick, elastic mud that is kneaded and pounded and squeezed under the hooves of the horses. The invincible, inexhaustible mud of the war zone. This is the song of the mud, the uniform of the Paulo. His coat is of mud, his great dragging, flapping coat that is too big for him and too heavy. His coat that once was blue and now is gray and stiff with the mud that cakes to it. This is the mud that clothes him. His trousers and boots are of mud, and his skin is of mud, and there is mud in his beard. His head is crowned with a helmet of mud. He wears it well. He wears it as a king wears the ermine that bores it. He has a new style in clothing. He's introduced the chic of mud. This is the song of the mud that wriggles its way into battle. The impertinent, the intrusive, the ubiquitous, the unwelcome, the slimy, inveterate nuisance that fills the trenches, that mixes in with the food of the soldiers, that spoils the working of motors and crawls into their secret parts, that spreads itself over the guns, that sucks the guns down and holds them fast in its slimy, voluptuous lips, that has no respect for destruction, muzzles the bursting shells, and slowly, softly, easily soaks up the fire, the noise, soaks up the energy and the courage, soaks up the power of armies, soaks up the battle. Just soaks it up and thus stops it. This is the hymn of mud, the obscene, the filthy, the putrid, the vast liquid grave of our armies. It has drowned our men. Its monstrous, distended belly reeks with the undigested dead. Our men have gone into it, sinking slowly and struggling and slowly disappearing. Our fine men, our brave, strong, young men. Our glorying red, shouting, brawny men, slowly, inch by inch, they've gone down into it, into its darkness, its thickness, its silence. Slowly, irresistibly, it drew them down, sucked them down, and they were drowned in thick, bitter, heaving mud. Now it hides them. Oh, so many of them. Under its smooth, glistening surface, it is hiding them blandly. There is not a trace of them. There is no mark where they went down. The mute, enormous mouth of the mud has closed over them. This is the song of the mud, the beautiful, glistening, golden mud that covers the hills like satin, the mysterious, gleaming, silvery mud that's spread like enamel over the valleys. Mud, the disguise of the war zone. Mud, the mantle of battles. Mud, the smooth, fluid grave of our soldiers. This is the song of the mud. Now you can't help but read a poem like this and be moved at 2b by the power of repetition. So let's start there. Notice the constant use of the word mud over and over and over again. Also at 2b, note the personification of mud as being, for example, lips and a mouth that reaches out and grabs soldiers and sucks them down under the mud. Notice the repetition of certain words over and over again, line after line. The beginning of the poem, the word thee for line 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then notice the word this and his, which of course in terms of sound has an interesting sound. This, his, the sound of mud sucking down, right? The repetitions at line of the word and at lines 11 and following. The repetition of the word he starting at line 14, 15, 16, 17. Notice the repetition of the word that over and over again, or the repetition of the word soaks. Notice all the hard S sibilant sounds that of course will play powerfully into this notion of mud that's slimy, right? Inveterate nuisance that fills the trenches. Notice the power of the S sounds. Notice the use of the word our. Line 35 and following. Our men, our fine men, our glowing, red, shouting, brawny men. That is to say, the last 2 lines of the poem, the smooth, fluid grave of our soldiers. The attempt to somehow bring the reader, the English reader, into the experience of all that was lost, the sacrifice. And of course at 2a for messages and themes, that's clearly what's going on here. It is a song, but it isn't like Whitman's Song of Myself. This is a tragic song. This is a dirge. This is, if you will, a tragedy. And it is a song of, not, notice, the soldiers. Not a song about sacrifice. It's a song of the mud. That is to say, mud that sucks down everything, mud that covers everything. The symbolism at 2b is obvious here, right? That is to say, mud is somehow going to allow all of those who have survived, and of course those living back home, to somehow slowly forget, hidden under the mud, the tragedy of all the sacrifice. Of course, another major message here is that war is, of course, hell. It is tragic in every aspect. It's not to be celebrated as something great. It's rather something, this poem suggests, that is to be lamented the passing, the loss, the fluid grave of our soldiers. At 3A, of course, we can write down any number of titles. The Iliad that celebrates the fighting, and yet often in times in the Iliad shows the gruesome side of war as well. The Aeneid, no question, Virgil's great epic poem. And of course, you can jot down in 3A. Notice how Beowulf will not give us this view of killing and dying, right? Beowulf will give us the heroic, celebrated view. Won't show us this. This is why Mary Borden's poem is so important for us. We've got to see all sides of the topic, right? We have to see all sides of the topic. Finally, at 3B, your own personal response to this. What are your thoughts about this? Why do you think individuals were willing to sacrifice themselves at such a young age? Notice we are told they are the young, the fine men, brave, strong, young men, glowing red, shouting, brawny men. What are your thoughts about that? Is war ever necessary? And to what degree do you think that the world has come to understand the tragedy of warfare, or to not understand that? To what degree have you yourself known of sacrifices? Has anyone in your family sacrificed for a greater good? And what was that? We'll turn now to the second of our two poems that are being given to us as views on war. This is Wilfred Owen's classic Dulce et Decorum Est, and we'll come back to study that one together. Thank you.